They tried to pull the dog away from his owner's side, but no matter how many times they called, begged, or even gently nudged him, he refused to move, not even an inch. What was he protecting? What was he holding on to, even as the man lay completely still? This isn't just a story about loyalty. It's a story about love, secrets, and a bond so powerful, it held on even when life let go. When an elderly man took his last breath, everyone thought the story ended there. But his dog had something else to say, something that left everyone in tears. Tom Reynolds was 83 years old, a man forgotten by most, remembered by few, but known deeply by only one. He lived alone in a small, weathered house on the edge of a sleepy little town where days melted into each other and the sound of birds was louder than traffic. His house wasn't much, a chipped picket fence, faded blue paint, and a rusty mailbox with his name half scratched off. It was the kind of place that looked like time had given up on it, just like people had given up on its owner. Tom wasn't someone people noticed. He wasn't loud. He didn't wear bright colors or hang holiday lights. He didn't attend church gatherings or host Sunday dinners. If you passed by his house, you might assume no one lived there at all. But he was there every single day, quiet, alone, except for one thing: Shadow, his dog, his only companion, his shadow in every way. Shadow wasn't a pup anymore either. His back legs shook a little when he walked. His eyes were clouded, and he had that slow, cautious movement that only comes with old age. But there was something sharp in him still, something that hadn't faded. An alertness, a knowing. Shadow would follow Tom everywhere. If Tom went to the kitchen, Shadow was behind him. If Tom sat in his recliner and stared at the old television with the antenna sticking out awkwardly, Shadow curled up beside the chair. If Tom went outside to sit on the porch for a few minutes, Shadow would position himself at Tom's feet, his eyes scanning the yard, always watching, always guarding. Their bond wasn't loud, but it was deep, so deep, in fact, that even neighbors, those who didn't care to ask about Tom, noticed one thing: he never went anywhere without Shadow, not even to check the mailbox. But here's where things began to shift. It started with silence, deeper than the usual quiet. Tom didn't get up one morning. He didn't pull open the faded curtains that usually led in the soft morning light. He didn't shuffle into the kitchen to make his usual weak tea, the one he drank more out of habit than taste. He didn't let Shadow out to the backyard to sniff the grass or bark at the crows. Shadow noticed immediately. He sat by the bedside, waiting, his ears perked but unsure. He let out a small whine, not loud, just a sound of confusion. Minutes passed, then an hour, then a whole day. The mail started to pile up in the box outside. 3 papers, then 4. The neighbor across the street, an older woman named Mabel, noticed the curtains hadn't been drawn in days. She'd lived across from Tom for 15 years and could count on one hand the number of conversations they'd had, but she knew his routine. She noticed that Shadow wasn't in the yard anymore. The little movements that made the old house feel alive had stopped. She called the police. When the paramedics arrived, they knocked first, then they pounded. Nothing. They broke the door open, and what they saw made them freeze. Shadow was already waiting. He was sitting by the side of the bed, still, silent, eyes locked on Tom's motionless body. His breathing was slow, but you could see the tension in his shoulders. The fur along his spine was stiff. Tom had passed away sometime during the night. It was peaceful. No struggle, no mess. Just a quiet end to a quiet life. But Shadow wouldn't move. And here's where the real problem began. Shadow didn't growl. He didn't bark. He didn't bite. He just refused. Refused to let them touch Tom. Refused to let them near the bed. Every time someone stepped close, Shadow stood up, not aggressively, but firmly. He planted himself between Tom and anyone else. His eyes stayed focused, almost warning them, as if saying, "You don't get to take him. Not yet." At first, they tried everything. Food, treats, calming voices. Nothing worked. He hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. A volunteer from the Animal Control Center, a young woman named Erica, stepped in. She'd dealt with aggressive rescues before. She thought maybe Shadow was just scared, defensive, protective. But when she sat down beside him, just a few feet away from the bed, she noticed something else, something that made her freeze. Shadow wasn't afraid. He was grieving, truly grieving. Tears, real ones, slowly falling from his eyes. His breathing was heavy, and every so often, he'd lift his head and nudge Tom's hand gently, as if trying to wake him up. Like maybe, just maybe, this was all some long nap. It was that moment, silent and small, that Erica knew this wasn't just another rescue case. Something was keeping Shadow there, something deeper than instinct. The coroner couldn't remove the body, not yet, so they waited. 1 hour, then 2, then a whole day passed. Shadow never moved. Neighbors started gathering, curious about the delay. Some remembered seeing Tom walk his dog down the block. Some recalled the stories of his military service, though most details had faded with time. But everyone watched in awe as this old, loyal dog guarded his person like it was his final mission. And slowly, they realized, Shadow knew something they didn't. But what? What could possibly keep a dog in mourning like that? Why wouldn't he let go? Was it grief, loyalty, or was it guilt? Erica sat with him through the night. She brought a blanket, some water, and just sat quietly nearby. At around midnight, Shadow finally looked at her. Not for food, not for attention, just a long, heavy glance. And then he did something no one expected. He walked away from the bed. Slowly, limping slightly, he made his way across the room. He stopped near the dresser. He looked up, then down, then back at Erica. Erica followed his gaze. There, behind the dresser, partially wedged against the wall, was a small box, wooden, covered in dust. She reached for it gently, watching Shadow for any sign of discomfort. But he didn't stop her. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, each one handwritten, each one addressed to a name no one had ever heard. To my son Jacob. Some were dated decades ago, others more recent, but all of them, every single one, was sealed, never sent. Erica's heart began to race as she realized what she was holding. Unsent letters from a father to a son no one in town even knew existed. What happened to Jacob? Why were these letters hidden? Why did Shadow lead her here? And what was the heartbreaking truth that this old dog had carried in silence for years? Erica stared at the letters, her hands trembling slightly. The ink on the envelopes had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable, neat, careful, and full of emotion. Every envelope started the same way. My dearest Jacob. Some of the paper was wrinkled, others still crisp. A few were stained, maybe with water, maybe with tears. Erica couldn't tell, but one thing was clear. Tom had written to a son no one had ever seen, no one had heard of. No photos, no mentions, just words sealed in silence, hidden in a dusty box behind a dresser. She looked at Shadow again, who had now curled up near the corner, not by the bed, but by the box, as if to say, this matters. Look here. The mystery deepened. Erica couldn't stop herself. She opened the first letter, the one on top, dated 1979. My dearest Jacob, I know you're angry. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I write these letters anyway, hoping that one day, even if I'm gone, you'll read them. I wasn't a perfect father. I wasn't even a good one. I made mistakes. I let my pride get in the way, but I never stopped thinking of you, and I never stopped loving you. Erica felt her throat tighten. This wasn't just grief. This was guilt, regret, a quiet scream into the void that had never been answered. She flipped through more letters. In one, Tom talked about leaving the military. In another, he described getting Shadow for the first time. He reminds me of you, always watching, always silent, but so full of something big. Page after page, year after year, Tom poured his heart into these letters, but never mailed a single one. Why? What had happened between father and son that led to this ghost of a relationship? Why did Tom choose to isolate himself in this small forgotten town, with only a loyal dog and a mountain of unread confessions? And Shadow, was Shadow more than just a pet? Was he a witness to Tom's final years of sorrow, a quiet guardian of his secrets? As the day passed and evening settled in, Erica stayed in the house. The authorities had agreed to hold off on removing the body for now. They saw how calm Shadow had become once the box was found, almost as if his mission had shifted. He wasn't protecting the body anymore. He was guiding someone somewhere, and Erica was beginning to feel it. That tug, that invisible thread, connecting her to something much bigger than she had signed up for. The next morning, she returned with a manila envelope, a small notebook, and a determination she hadn't felt in years. She began cataloging every letter, every photo she could find in the drawers, every clue to who Jacob was. But the town offered no help. Neighbors had never heard of a son. There were no pictures on the walls, no emergency contacts in the old phone book. Even the mailbox held only junk mail and bills. It was like Jacob never existed, except in Tom's heart. Until, on the third night, Erica noticed something. Shadow kept staring at the hallway. Not randomly, not out of habit. He would walk to the hallway, sit, stare at the closet door, and then come back, again, and again, and again. By the fifth time, Erica followed him. She opened the closet. Inside were winter coats, an old vacuum, and a small metal safe, buried beneath blankets. The kind of safe with a dial lock, scratched from years of use. She called the police. They opened it. Inside, A single photograph, old, faded, black and white, a young boy standing next to a stern-looking man, Tom, only decades younger. The boy had a crooked smile and a cast on his arm, written in small handwriting on the back. Jacob, age 8, after the fall, still brave. And under that, he said, "I didn't catch him in time, but I tried." Erica froze. She turned to Shadow, whose head had dipped low, eyes on the floor. The grief, the loyalty, the guilt. Tom had failed to catch his son, literally, in some accident. Maybe a fall from a tree, a roof, a moment where a father was too slow. And maybe that one moment changed everything. The story started forming in Erica's mind. A child gets hurt. A father blames himself. The child grows distant. The father grows older. Time passes, but regret doesn't. And Shadow, he lived it every single day. He wasn't just loyal. He was carrying Tom's sorrow like a second leash. And now, Tom was gone, but the pain, still here. Shadow still wasn't eating, still wasn't leaving the house. He'd walk from the hallway to the dresser to the bed, as if following an invisible path only he could see. A ritual, a pattern, like he was waiting for someone. Erica knew what she had to do. She made copies of the letters, shared them with local papers, posted the photo online, on forums, old military family boards, anywhere she could. She didn't expect much. But then, 5 days later, a man walked into the shelter where Shadow had been temporarily brought after Tom's body was taken. He was tall, middle-aged, graying around the temples. He held a copy of the photo in his hand. His voice was trembling. I think that's me," he said. The staff looked stunned. "I think that was my father." The man stood still, staring at the image in his hand, his eyes darting between the photo and the large German shepherd lying quietly in the corner of the room. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't growl. But the moment the man stepped inside, Shadow lifted his head, and for the first time since Tom had passed, he stood up. No one in the shelter had seen that yet, not even once. Shadow had refused food, refused touch, refused comfort. He had been a statue of grief. But now something had shifted. The man knelt slowly. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Hey, buddy, do you remember me?" Shadow didn't move fast, but he moved. 1 step, 2 steps, and then gently, he placed his head into the man's lap. A deep, long breath escaped him, like the weight of a decade had finally been lifted. The staff watched in silence, and Erica, she wept, because she knew this was Jacob, Tom's son, the one Shadow had been waiting for, the one Tom had written hundreds of letters to but never mailed, the one whose name had filled every line of regret and hope. Jacob explained everything. Yes, he had fallen from a tree when he was 8, broke his arm, but the injury wasn't what left a scar. It was the fight afterward. His father had blamed himself, had yelled, had withdrawn, and as the years passed, silence replaced love. Jacob had left home at 17, never looked back. Pride, pain, and distance had created a canyon neither of them had crossed again. He never knew his father wrote him letters. He never knew his father had a dog, and he never knew that dog had spent every single day protecting the man who'd spent a lifetime trying to say, "I'm sorry." The letters, the photo, the safe, they were Tom's quiet way of speaking after the damage had been done. And Shadow, he had become more than just a pet. He was Tom's guardian, his final friend, and his witness. He had kept watch over every word, every routine, every moment of stillness, not just out of habit, but out of love. Because to Shadow, Tom was not just a man. He was home. For the next 2 hours, Jacob sat on the floor of that small shelter room, petting the dog he never knew had been waiting for him. He read some of the letters, out loud, and Shadow listened. He licked Jacob's hand, rested his head on his knee, closed his eyes, not out of sadness, but peace. Because whatever Shadow had been holding on for, it had finally happened. The goodbye that Tom never got to say had finally been heard. Jacob took Shadow home that evening. He didn't say much, just nodded and thanked everyone. But Erica knew. She knew that house on the edge of town, the quiet one with creaky floorboards and fading curtains, had held a storm of emotions for years. Guilt, love, pain, loyalty, and at the center of it all, one dog who never gave up. Not when the world forgot the man he loved. Not when regret filled every silent day. Not even when death finally came. Shadow waited, because love like that doesn't vanish. It stays. It watches. And when the time is right, it leads the way back home. Shadow didn't eat for 2 days straight. Not a single bite. The shelter staff tried everything. Soft food, treats, even boiled chicken. But he just sat there, eyes fixed on the door, waiting. It wasn't just hunger. It was grief. A deep, stubborn grief that clung to him like a second skin. Shadow didn't whimper. He didn't bark. He just waited, like he was expecting Tom to come back any moment now and scold him gently for being too clingy again. Like the sound of Tom's boots would echo through the hallway, and everything would be back to normal. The staff had seen grieving dogs before. It wasn't uncommon when a pet loses their owner, but this was different. There was something in the way Shadow sat, like a soldier at post, vigilant, unmoving, eyes full of purpose, as if guarding something precious, something more than memory. The shelter's manager, Erica, took a special interest in him. She was in her early 40s, a woman who had rescued more animals than she could count. She'd seen dogs come in shattered and leave whole again. But Shadow, he had a story written all over him, and it was one she couldn't read yet. "I don't think he's waiting for Tom," she murmured one evening to her colleague, watching Shadow refuse to lie on the warm blanket she'd brought him. "I think he's waiting for someone else." "Like who?" Erica didn't answer, not because she didn't have a guess, but because her gut told her the story was more tangled than it looked. The shelter made a Facebook post that night. They added Shadow's photo, head bowed, eyes like broken glass. The caption read, "This boy lost his best friend. He's grieving. He won't eat. He won't rest. If anyone recognizes him or knows of Tom Reynolds, please reach out." The post went viral. People began to comment, offering to adopt Shadow, to give him a new home. But Erica held back. There was something unfinished, something Shadow hadn't let go of, and until he did, she wouldn't either. A week passed. That's when the package arrived. No return address, just a plain envelope. Inside was a small key and a note. "If Shadow's still waiting, maybe this will help. 2113, Maple Street, bedroom closet, back wall, J." Erica froze. She knew the house, the same weathered place they'd picked Shadow up from. The note, it was personal, handwritten. Someone knew more than they were saying. She called the local authorities, got permission to access the property one more time, and early the next morning, she drove out there, Shadow in the backseat of her car. He didn't bark, didn't whine, but when she turned the corner onto Maple Street, his ears perked up. He recognized the road, recognized the smell of the trees, the faint whistle of wind that only a dog who'd lived a decade in one spot could know. Inside the house, Erica walked to the bedroom. Shadow followed closely. She opened the closet, pressed against the back wall. She found a loose wooden panel. Behind it, an old lockbox, dusty, unopened. The key worked. Inside were two things: a stack of letters, yellowed and creased with age, and a photograph of a young boy, maybe 8 years old, smiling beside a much younger Tom, and a puppy that looked exactly like a young Shadow. But it couldn't be. Shadow was only 11. The math didn't add up. Erica flipped through the letters. Each one was addressed to Jacob, Tom's son. The name never came up during the paramedics' report. No emergency contact. No family ever claimed the body. No obituary with names attached. Erica read the first line out loud. "Dear Jacob, I'm sorry I never learned how to say this face-to-face." Her throat caught. Shadow sat at her feet, tail still, but eyes locked onto the photograph. And then, for the first time since Tom passed, he let out a sound, a low, aching whine. It wasn't grief. It was recognition. He remembered. The letters spanned years, dozens of them, apologies, updates, little stories from Tom's life, the dog's tricks, his health, his regrets, and in every single letter, a longing, a hope that someday, maybe, Jacob would forgive him, that maybe, someday, he'd come home. And then came the last letter, short, barely 3 lines. "If you ever find this, please know I tried." Shadow waited every day by the door, maybe for you, maybe for redemption. "I hope you'll understand, Dad." Erica couldn't hold back her tears anymore. Shadow nudged the box, not violently, gently, like he wanted her to see something else. And she did. Under the letters was a tiny collar, worn, almost falling apart. On the tag, Jacob's buddy. Erica pieced it together slowly, like a puzzle of pain and time. Tom had gotten Shadow as a replacement, or maybe a continuation. Jacob had a dog growing up, a puppy he loved. But when Jacob left, the dog stayed, and not long after, he passed. Tom got another dog, one that looked nearly identical, Shadow. He had named him Jacob's buddy too, not just in memory of the past, but in desperate hope that one day, when Jacob came back, he'd still have a piece of his childhood waiting for him. Shadow wasn't just loyal to Tom, he was waiting for Jacob. At first, the paramedics tried to do their job, gently, respectfully, but as soon as one of them stepped closer to Tom's lifeless body, Shadow growled, not just a low grumble or a warning bark. This was deep, guttural, the kind of sound that freezes you in your tracks. His hackles rose, His body, old and aching, stood tall and firm. He was guarding something, and it wasn't just instinct. It was personal. They tried treats. Nothing. They tried coaxing. Nothing. Even a family friend, an old co-worker of Tom's who was called in, tried to pet Shadow, but the dog just sat there, planted like a stone, refusing to budge. Word started to spread through the neighborhood. First, it was quiet murmurs over fences. Then it turned into whispers in the local diner. Did you hear about old man Reynolds? Yeah, dog won't leave his side, just sitting there like he's on watch. But the question that nobody could answer was why? Shadow wasn't just mourning. Anyone could see that. This wasn't the usual grief, where a dog whimpers or lies by the door waiting. Shadow was protecting something. His body, his eyes, his posture. They were all saying the same thing. Stay back. Even a vet who came in to help couldn't understand it. She sat beside Shadow for nearly an hour, just observing, and what she noticed sent a chill down her spine. He's not just guarding Tom, she whispered to one of the officers outside. He's listening, watching, like he knows something we don't. And that's when the theory started forming. What if Tom's death wasn't as simple as it seemed? The autopsy confirmed a peaceful passing in his sleep. No foul play, no medical emergency, but something didn't sit right, because every time someone stepped foot into that room, Shadow growled, not randomly, but only when someone moved toward the small wooden drawer beside the bed. At first, it seemed like nothing, just an old bedside drawer with books and maybe a pair of glasses. But Shadow didn't growl at people entering the room. He growled specifically at anyone reaching for that drawer. That's when it shifted from sad to strange. Why that drawer? Why now? After 2 days, Animal Control considered removing Shadow for safety, but no one could stomach it. Even they felt something was off. One of the officers, Maria, stayed behind after her shift and decided to take a different approach. She brought food, water, and a soft blanket, sitting near Shadow in silence. Hours passed. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just waited. Eventually, Shadow stopped growling. He didn't wag his tail, didn't move closer, but he let her near. That alone felt like progress. The next day, Maria returned, this time with an old photograph she'd found on the mantel. It was Tom, much younger, standing in a military uniform beside a woman holding a baby. And there, almost hidden near the bottom of the frame, was a younger Shadow. Shadow looked at the photo, then at Maria. No sound, no movement, just something changed. His eyes softened, like a flicker of memory had sparked inside him. Maria took a chance. She moved her hand slowly toward the drawer. No growl. She stopped, moved again. Still nothing. Finally, she opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to someone named Amy. Some were old, yellowed with time. Others looked newer, recently written. Maria picked one up and began to read. Dear Amy, today was one of the hard days. The kind where even Shadow can't lift my spirits. I miss your laugh. I miss your tiny hands grabbing at my collar. I don't know if you ever got the others I sent. Maybe they got lost. Maybe your mother kept them from you. I don't blame her. Not anymore. If by some miracle you ever read these, I want you to know, I never stopped loving you. I never stopped trying. Dad. Maria's hands shook as she read more. Letter after letter, some written with hope, others with heartbreak. Tom hadn't been completely alone. He had a daughter he hadn't seen in decades. Shadow had been there for all of it, through the silence, the letters, the waiting. Now it made sense. The loyalty, the drawer, the protection. Shadow wasn't just guarding his owner. He was guarding the truth Tom never got to say out loud. But this only raised more questions. Who was Amy? Where was she? Did she even know Tom was gone? Maria took the letters to her supervisor, and together they started digging. No local records under Amy Reynolds. But then one clue. A hospital file. Tom had been treated for pneumonia 2 years earlier, and under next of kin, he had scribbled a name, Amy L. Carter. A quick search revealed she lived 3 towns over. Maria made the call. When Amy answered, she was cautious, cold even. Tom Reynolds, she asked. That's my father. It turned out Amy had grown up thinking her dad had abandoned her and her mother. They moved away when she was only 4. Her mom told her stories that painted Tom as the villain. Maria didn't argue. She just asked her to come. Bring an open heart, she said softly, and maybe bring a leash. Amy arrived the next day. She looked just like the woman in the photograph. As she stepped into the house, Shadow looked up, and for the first time since Tom died, he moved. Not just his head, his whole body. He stood up, limped over, and rested his head against Amy's hand. And Amy, overwhelmed by everything, fell to her knees and cried. She held him like she was hugging her father one last time. Shadow stayed by her side the entire day. Maria handed her the letters. Amy didn't say a word for a long while. She sat by the window, reading page after page, tears falling quietly. Later, she looked up and whispered, "He never stopped writing to me." Shadow nuzzled into her lap, eyes closing like a weight had finally been lifted. That night, for the first time since Tom's passing, Shadow didn't sleep on the cold floor by the bed. He slept curled up next to Amy. The days after Amy's arrival felt like a slow unraveling of everything that had been buried under years of pain, loneliness, and silence. Amy was trying to process everything, but the letters, the memories, the sudden surge of emotions, it was all too much for her to bear. She stayed at Tom's house for a few days, going through the photos, sorting through the letters, trying to piece together a version of the man she had never known. And through it all, Shadow stayed by her side, silent, unwavering, his presence a constant reminder that the past wasn't as simple as she'd been told. He had loved Tom, loved him like family, and Amy couldn't understand why, after all these years, her father had never reached out to her. But it wasn't just the past that hung in the air. It was the present, the unsettling feeling that something else was waiting to be uncovered. It was one evening when Amy was sitting by the window, the sun sinking low in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the room. Shadow, curled up beside her, had started acting restless. His eyes darted back and forth as though he could hear something distant, yet urgent. Amy looked down at him. "What is it, Shadow?" she whispered, but the dog didn't respond. He just stared at the door, and for the first time since she arrived, Amy felt a shiver run through her spine. It wasn't a normal look. It was as if Shadow was telling her something important. Maria, the officer who had been helping them, was on her way over to check on Amy, and Shadow had never been this agitated before. He paced, whining softly under his breath, then returned to the door, his gaze locked on the handle. The hairs on the back of Amy's neck stood up. She rose from her seat and walked cautiously to the door. She hesitated for a moment before turning the handle, but as soon as she did, a loud knock came from the other side. Amy froze. It wasn't just a casual knock. It was frantic, insistent, almost desperate, and before she could even process what was happening, the door flew open, revealing a tall man standing there. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something in his eyes that made Amy's stomach drop. It was a look she had seen once before, on the face of someone who had lost everything. His voice came out in a low rasp. "I'm here to see Shadow." Amy's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, certainly not a stranger, who looked like he had been carrying a heavy burden for years. "Who are you?" Amy asked, her voice trembling. The man's gaze flicked past her, landing on Shadow. The dog had already moved from the doorway and was sitting in the middle of the room, his body tense, eyes fixed on the man. I'm Frank," the man said. I'm Tom's old friend. We were in the army together. I never thought," his voice faltered, his chest rising and falling with each breath. "I never thought I'd be here. Not like this." Amy didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected anyone, especially not someone from Tom's past. But something about Frank's presence seemed to trigger something in Shadow. The dog slowly stood up, walking toward Frank. There was no growl, no warning, just a solemn, heavy step. It was like the dog recognized him, knew him. Frank knelt down, and Shadow placed his head gently on Frank's knee. Tears welled up in Frank's eyes as he stroked the dog's head. "He's still here," he whispered. "After all these years." Amy watched, confused, as Frank continued to pet Shadow, his fingers trembling. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "Who are you really? What is it you want?" Frank looked up at her, his face full of pain. "I didn't just lose a friend, Amy. I lost a part of myself that I can never get back." "Tom, he never told you, did he?" Amy shook her head slowly, her mind racing. "Your father, he was my brother," Frank said, his voice breaking. "I promised him I'd look out for Shadow. He was supposed to be my responsibility after everything happened, but I wasn't there. I didn't keep my word." Amy stood frozen. This was the truth she had never known, the truth that had been hidden behind the letters, behind the walls of Tom's house. She took a step closer, her heart pounding. What happened to him? What did he keep from me? Frank took a deep breath, then said the words that tore through the silence like a thunderclap. "Tom didn't just leave you, Amy. He had to. He was running from something he couldn't tell you about. And I didn't help him. I didn't keep my promise. He had his reasons. But Shadow was always there. Always." Frank's voice broke as he continued. "Your father was a hero, Amy. He saved my life more times than I can count. But the day he went away, he left more than just his family behind. He left me, and I failed him. I wasn't there for him like I should have been. And now Shadow, he's the only one left who knows the truth. Amy felt a wave of emotions crash over her. Anger, grief, confusion, all mixing together. But why didn't he ever tell me? She asked through gritted teeth. Why didn't he ever write to me? Why didn't he? Before she could finish, Shadow stood and walked over to the window. He stared out into the horizon, his tail lowering, his body sagging as if weighed down by the gravity of the past. Amy followed his gaze, her heart racing, and then, for the first time, Shadow howled. It wasn't a mournful sound, it was a sound of release, a sound that shook the walls of the house and seemed to carry across the years. He had been waiting for this moment, for Amy, for the truth, for forgiveness. The room fell silent after Shadow's mournful howl. The dog, who had spent years guarding Tom's memory, now stood at the center of the storm. His eyes, full of wisdom and sorrow, seemed to speak volumes about the years of loyalty, love, and regret that had been carried quietly beneath his stoic exterior. Amy stood frozen, her heart heavy with the weight of the revelation. Her father, a man she had believed to be just a quiet, solitary figure, had been hiding so much more. He had been a hero, a man who had protected his friends, fought battles that no one knew about, and carried burdens that had slowly chipped away at him. And yet, despite all that, Amy had never understood the full scope of his sacrifice. She had been left with nothing but empty memories and unanswered questions. But now, standing in the room where Tom had spent his final years, Amy felt the weight of her father's absence in a new way. The realization that he had been running from something so profound that he couldn't even share it with her, was almost too much to bear. But in that pain, there was also a sense of understanding, a sense of closure. Frank, still kneeling beside Shadow, looked up at Amy with tear-filled eyes. His voice cracked as he spoke. It's not easy, I know, but you're not alone anymore. Shadow, he's been waiting for you. All these years, he's been guarding the memory of your father, keeping the pieces of the past together. Amy swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. I don't know how to process all of this, she said, her voice shaking. Why didn't he just tell me? Why didn't he trust me with the truth? Frank sighed, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Your father, he was a man of pride. He didn't want you to see the pain he had endured. He didn't want to burden you with the things he carried. He thought he could handle it on his own. But Shadow was always there, always watching, always waiting. Amy turned to look at the dog, who was still standing near the window, his body now calm. It was as if the final chapter had been written, and the dog knew it. He had done his duty, carried his weight, and now his mission was complete. Shadow, you were always there, weren't you? Amy whispered, her voice barely audible. You were the only one who truly understood him. For a long moment, there was only the quiet hum of the house, the soft rustle of leaves outside the window, and the gentle ticking of an old clock on the wall. The weight of the past and the present seemed to settle into the room, creating a stillness that spoke of finality. Amy stepped forward, her hand reaching out to Shadow, who turned and met her gaze with those deep, knowing eyes. In that moment, something shifted. It was as if a bond had formed between them, an unspoken understanding that transcended the years of separation, the pain of loss, and the weight of unasked questions. Shadow had been her father's constant companion, his protector and his confidant, and now he would be hers. Amy crouched down beside the dog, her fingers gently brushing through his fur. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for taking care of him. I promise, I'll take care of you now. The door creaked open behind her, and Maria, the officer who had been helping them, stepped inside. Her eyes flicked to the emotional scene in front of her, and she stepped forward, her voice soft. I know this has been hard, Amy, but it's a good thing. It's the kind of closure we all need. Not just for you, but for Shadow too. Amy nodded slowly, looking back at Shadow as he lay down by her feet, his head resting on his paws. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't understand why her father had kept so much from her, why he had chosen to live his final years in solitude. But she knew one thing for sure. Shadow had been the keeper of his soul, the silent witness to the love and loss that had shaped Tom's life. In the coming days, Amy continued to sort through Tom's belongings, uncovering more letters, more memories, pieces of a life that had been hidden away for far too long. Each letter, each photograph, gave her a glimpse of the man her father had been before the weight of the world had worn him down. And in each of those moments, she found herself grieving not just for Tom, but for the man he had been before his silence had consumed him. But the pain began to lessen, replaced by a quiet peace. She wasn't alone anymore. Shadow, with his unwavering loyalty and silent strength, had become her companion. She could feel her father's presence in the room, not as a memory locked away in time, but as a living, breathing connection that transcended the walls of his old house. The days turned into weeks, and Amy began to rebuild, not just the life her father had left behind, but the one that she herself had been missing. She began to understand the depth of the bond between Tom and Shadow, and in that understanding, she found a sense of healing. Shadow had waited all these years, guarding the truth, protecting the past, and now, with Amy by his side, he could finally rest. His mission was complete, and Amy, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. A sense of closure, a sense of peace, and a new family that, though broken by time, had been mended by love. Amy looked down at Shadow, who lay beside her, his eyes soft and trusting. She knew their journey was just beginning. The past was gone, but the future, filled with healing, love, and the memory of Tom, was waiting. As she whispered her final words to Shadow, she knew they would both walk forward, together, one step at a time. "Thank you," she said once more. "We've got this now, together."